A wealthy man boards a private jet with his new girlfriend, ready for a romantic weekend. When he finally sees who is piloting, his blood runs cold. It was his ex-girlfriend, the one he abandoned without explanation. What happens next reveals a past he tried to bury. Before you watch, like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are from so we can deliver even more videos to you. 3 minutes to take off, sir, the flight attendant announced, as Michael Dawson watched the technician make the final adjustments to the jet's engine from the window. Just then, his phone vibrated with an anonymous message. "She's in the cockpit, and so is your son." The businessman choked on a sip of champagne, feeling the liquid burn his throat. "Impossible," he muttered, looking at Isabel, who was touching up her lipstick, oblivious to the emotional tsunami those 7 words had unleashed. Ignoring the crew's protests, Michael stood up on an impulse and ran down the luxurious corridor. He pushed the cockpit door open with unnecessary force, only to freeze at the sight that would change his life forever. Julia, the woman he had abandoned 5 years ago, was commanding the controls with the same precision with which she had once touched his heart. And next to her, wearing a mini pilot's uniform, was a boy who was his perfect miniature reflection. Time seemed to suspend itself in that instant. The roar of the engines, the electronic signals from the control panel, everything disappeared in the face of the deafening silence of that impossible encounter. Michael felt his blood run cold in his veins as his brain struggled to process the scene before him. "Sir, I must ask you to return to your seat. We are in the process of taking off." Julia spoke with a professional calm that contrasted violently with the storm in her green eyes. No tremor in her voice betrayed the emotional hurricane that was surely consuming her inside. The boy turned around, curious, his big brown eyes, the same eyes as Michael's, shining with innocence and enthusiasm. "Hello, I'm Leo. Do you like planes? This one is my favorite," he said, holding up a miniature model of an aircraft. For the first time in his life, Michael Dawson, the real estate magnate known for his eloquence in any situation, was completely speechless. "Sir," a flight attendant, Carla, appeared behind him. "I must insist that you return to your seat for takeoff." "Of course," he murmured automatically, his gaze still fixed on the boy who was smiling innocently. "Of course." Stumbling down the corridor, Michael returned to his seat, his body on autopilot, while his mind spun in a whirlwind. Those eyes, that chin, even the way he tilted his head slightly. There was no possible doubt. "Honey, what happened? You're as pale as if you've seen a ghost." Isabel touched his arm, her concern evident on her perfect face. A ghost? Yes, that's exactly what it was. The ghost of his past, of decisions made with the calculated coldness that had always guided his life. The ghost of a relationship he had decided to end with a simple note, without looking back, without considering consequences beyond his own emotional comfort. "It's nothing," he lied in a hoarse voice. "Just a slight vertigo." The aircraft's communication system emitted a soft noise before Julia's controlled voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard. Our flight to Fernando de Noronha is expected to take 2 hours and 40 minutes. The weather is perfect for flying, with a clear sky throughout the route. Please keep your seatbelts fastened during takeoff, relax, and have an excellent flight." Michael closed his eyes, every word of hers penetrating him like needles. Captain. Of course she had become a pilot. Julia had always been brilliant, determined, capable of conquering anything she desired. A talented aerospace engineer, she talked about aviation with passion, even when he condescendingly suggested it was just a hobby. The jet accelerated down the runway, pressing him against his seat. As the aircraft gained altitude, Michael felt his perfectly controlled world plummeting in a freefall. Who sent that message? The question formed in his mind, making him check his phone again. Unknown number, no identification. How could anyone know? How could anyone predict this impossible encounter? Let's toast to our weekend, Isabel suggested, already recovered from her momentary concern, pouring 2 glasses of the Dom Perignon champagne that the flight attendant had just brought. Michael nodded mechanically, his gaze still lost in the void, while his fingers touched the small object in the inside pocket of his jacket. The engagement rings he intended to use to seal a future that, in the last 5 minutes, had become terribly uncertain. To us, she raised her glass, her eyes shining with anticipation. At 20 Eve, Isabel represented everything he valued: beauty, youth, an absence of emotional complications, and an almost reverential admiration for his position and power. To us, he responded automatically, the bubbly liquid going down his throat without taste. For the next hour, Michael pretended to work on his tablet, numbers and graphs dancing senselessly before his eyes, while his mind reconstructed fragments of the past. He remembered his last night with Julia, their discussion about commitment, about building something real together. He remembered his own silent panic at the prospect of emotional vulnerability, the cold decision to cut all ties, to simply disappear. "We are encountering some light turbulence," Julia's voice sounded again on the communication system. "Please keep your seatbelts fastened until the sign is turned off." The aircraft shook slightly, mirroring Michael's inner turmoil. Isabel grabbed his arm, her fear of flying suddenly visible on her flawlessly made-up face. "Is everything okay?" he mechanically reassured, the words sounding empty. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. "Mr. Dawson," the flight attendant approached discreetly after a few minutes. "The captain requests your presence in the cockpit, if possible." Michael felt his stomach drop. Isabel raised her eyebrows, intrigued. Since when do pilots call passengers to the cockpit during flights? "It must be about the arrival time," he improvised, unfastening his seatbelt. "I'll be back in a minute." Every step toward the cockpit seemed to last an eternity. The jet's luxurious corridor, which had always represented his success and power, now seemed like a narrow tunnel leading to an inevitable confrontation with the consequences of his choices. Upon entering the cockpit, he found only Leo, still playing with his toy plane. The boy smiled when he saw him. "Mommy said to wait here because she needed to check something in the back. Do you want to see my plane collection?" The boy opened a small, colorful backpack, revealing carefully organized miniatures. Michael sat down slowly in the co-pilot's seat, watching that child, his son, with a mixture of fascination and terror. How was it possible that this small being existed without him knowing? How was it possible that something so significant could occur in a world he always believed he completely controlled? "This is my favorite," Leo continued, oblivious to the emotional turmoil of the man beside him. "It's a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Mommy said that one day we'll pilot a real one together." "Your mom, is she a good pilot?" Michael asked, his voice almost a whisper. "The best in the world." The boy's enthusiasm was contagious. "She knows everything about planes, and she also teaches me math and physics. I'm going to be a pilot just like her when I grow up." The cockpit door opened, and Julia returned, her gaze meeting Michael's for a brief moment, before returning to the instruments. "Leo, honey, Carla will take you to see the rest of the plane, okay? I need to talk to Mr. Dawson." The boy nodded animatedly, collecting his planes before following the flight attendant. When the door closed, the silence in the cockpit became almost tangible. "He doesn't know," Julia finally spoke, her eyes fixed on the control panel. For him, his dad is a pilot who works on international routes and can't be present. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael questioned, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "Tell you?" She finally turned to face him, years of pain contained in her gaze. "To the man who disappeared leaving only a note, who blocked my number, who instructed his employees to tell me he had moved to another country?" Michael had no answer. For the first time, he saw the magnitude of his actions through someone else's eyes. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you left," she continued, her voice controlled, professional. "And I decided that my son deserved more than a father who didn't want to be found." The plane shook again with more turbulence, mirroring Michael's internal agitation. "And this meeting is a coincidence?" A faint smile appeared on Julia's lips. "Do you believe in coincidences, Michael? In a world with thousands of pilots and hundreds of executive aviation companies?" Before he could respond, the panel emitted an alert demanding Julia's attention. "Please return to your seat. We have a technical problem to solve." "And what kind of problem?" Concern was evident in his voice. "Nothing your precious model girlfriend needs to worry about," Julia replied, the first sign of emotion in her perfectly controlled voice. "Just a secondary hydraulic system failure. We'll have to make an unscheduled landing for a checkup." Michael stood up, stunned. "Where?" "Casimiro de Abreu," she replied, adjusting some controls. "A small town in the interior of the Rio de Janeiro state. It has a good runway and excellent mechanics." Upon mentioning the name of the city, her eyes met his again, and Michael understood. It wasn't just any city with a suitable runway. It was where Julia was living, where his son was growing up. "This isn't a coincidence, is it?" he murmured, understanding finally forming. Julia's look was unreadable when she responded. "Life rarely gives us second chances, Michael. What we do with them is our choice." As he returned to his seat, feeling the plane begin a gentle descent, Michael reread the mysterious message on his phone. "She's in the cockpit, and so is your son." Who could have known? Who would be orchestrating this impossible encounter? Hibo looked at Isabel, distracted by a fashion magazine, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake that was redefining the landscape of his life. The rings in his pocket seemed to weigh tons now, as the jet descended toward a small town that, he sensed, would change his destiny forever. "Any problem?" Isabel asked, noticing his disturbed expression. "Change of plans," he replied, his voice strangely calm considering the internal chaos. "We'll need to make a technical stop before heading to the resort." The landing sign lit up, and Julia's voice, professional and controlled, filled the cabin one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent procedure for the regional airport of Casimiro de Abreu. Due to technical reasons, we will make an unscheduled stop. We ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Thank you for your understanding." Michael Dawson, the man who built a real estate empire, planning every move with millimeter precision, who never left anything to chance. He now found himself completely adrift, descending toward a future he could not predict or control. For the first time in his life, the man who always had all the answers was completely speechless before the most important question he had ever faced. How to be a father to a son he didn't know existed. The small Casimiro de Abreu airport was little more than a concrete runway with a modest hangar and a makeshift waiting room. When the jet's stairs were positioned and the door opened, Michael felt the humid heat of the interior of Rio de Janeiro state envelop him like a premonition. The relentless midday sun reflected on the asphalt, creating waves of heat that distorted the mountainous landscape in the background. "Welcome to Casimiro de Abreu," Julia announced to the group, her professional voice contrasting with the intensity of her gaze when it briefly met Michael's. "Unfortunately, we'll need a few hours for maintenance. The problem with the secondary hydraulic system requires parts that are being brought from Rio. I recommend that you take the opportunity to see the city or rest at the local hotel." "Local hotel!" Isabel couldn't hide the horror in her voice, her eyes scanning the countryside landscape with obvious discomfort. "What kind of place is this?" Michael watched little Leo skip down the stairs, the child's energy in full contrast with the palpable tension between the adults. The boy held Julia's hand tightly, looking at everything around him with the insatiable curiosity typical of a 5-year-old. "Mommy, can we go see the planes in the hangar before we go home?" the little one asked, pulling lightly on her uniform sleeve. Home. The word echoed in Michael's mind. This place was their home. His son had grown up here, away from him, building memories he would never be a part of. "We have guests today, honey," Julia replied, stroking the boy's hair. "We need to be good hosts." "Mr. Dawson and the lady are going to our house?" The enthusiasm in the boy's voice made Michael's heart ache. "Can I show them my complete collection of planes?" Before Julia could respond, an elderly man approached, walking with the aid of a carved cane. His shrewd eyes examined the group for a moment before he broke into a warm smile. "Grandpa Carlos." Leo ran to the old man, who lifted him up with surprising strength for his apparent age. "These are our passengers," Julia explained, maintaining her professional composure. "Mr. Michael Dawson and Ms. Isabel Montero. We have a technical problem and will need to stay until tomorrow." The old man Carlos's eyes fixed on Michael with a disconcerting intensity, as if he saw far beyond the businessman's polished facade. "Dawson," he repeated slowly. "The famous real estate businessman. What an interesting coincidence." Yet there was nothing casual in his tone, and Michael immediately realized that the old man knew exactly who he was, and what he represented in Julia and Leo's lives. "Well, we can't leave our visitors without proper accommodation," Carlos continued. "Our guest house is at your disposal, although it's not as luxurious as the hotels you must be used to." "Guest house?" Isabel whispered to Michael, her displeasure evident. "I appreciate the offer," Michael replied, feeling strangely vulnerable under the old man's penetrating gaze. "But we don't want to bother you. There must be a hotel in the city." "The only hotel is under renovation." Carlos smiled, a sparkle of amusement in his eyes. "Our guest house is small but comfortable, and it's close to the mechanic's workshop, which will make it easier when the parts arrive." Michael realized the subtly constructed trap. There were no coincidences there, from the technical failure to the only available accommodation option. "Grandpa makes the best breakfast in the world," Leo exclaimed, hanging on the old man's neck. "And there's a lake where we can see turtles." "It seems we don't have much of a choice," Michael conceded, trying to ignore Isabel's furious look. 20 minutes later, an old truck parked in front of a charming colonial house, converted into a guest house. Well-kept gardens framed the century-old building, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. In the background, a serene lake reflected the blue sky, and green mountains completed the bucolic landscape. "Welcome to the Blue Horizon Guest House," Carlos announced, leading them across the polished wooden porch. "We only have 5 suites, but all of them have a view of the lake or the mountains." The interior was a harmonious combination of preserved antiques and discreetly integrated modern comforts. Black and white photographs decorated the walls, telling the story of the region and the family. "It's charming," Isabel commented, clearly disappointed but trying to be polite. Leo pulled Michael's hand, taking him by surprise. "Come see my room. It has a whole wall of planes." Then Michael shot a questioning look at Julia, who gave a slight, authorizing nod, allowing him to follow the boy. The corridor they walked down was decorated with more old photographs, many of them showing a younger Julia, some with an elderly man in a pilot's uniform, whom Michael presumed to be Julia's grandfather. Leo's room was a miniature aviation dream. An entire wall had been transformed into a sky, with hand-painted clouds and dozens of model planes hung at different altitudes. A cockpit-shaped bed dominated the center, and shelves displayed children's books about aviation, many in English and Spanish. "This is me when I grow up," Leo pointed to a poster of a pilot in front of a Boeing 787. "I'm going to fly all over the world, just like my dad." Michael felt his heart skip a beat. "Your dad?" "He's an international pilot," Leo responded with innocent pride. "Mommy says he flies so far and for so long that he can't visit us. But one day, when I'm a pilot too, I'll find him in the sky." The simplicity of the explanation, the purity of the hope in the boy's eyes, hit Michael like a physical punch. What kind of man had he become for Julia to need to create this story? What kind of man would he be now, in the face of this revelation? "I'm sure you will," he managed to say in a trembling voice. "Leo!" Julia appeared at the door, her gaze cautious. "Time for lunch, honey. Go wash your hands." The boy ran out, leaving Michael and Julia alone in the room, filled with childhood dreams. "You told him that his dad is a pilot," Michael murmured, not as an accusation, but as a painful observation. "It seemed appropriate," she responded, crossing her arms defensively. "He's loved planes since he was little. It must be in the blood." "Julia, don't," she interrupted, her voice low but firm. "Not here, not now. We have a lunch to survive with your son and your girlfriend at the same table. One drama at a time, Michael." She was right as always. Julia had always been the sensible one, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while he just reacted. Lunch was served on the back porch, overlooking the lake. The table was set with simple elegance: a linen tablecloth, old china, polished silver cutlery. Carlos presided at the head of the table, with Leo at his side. Julia sat next to her son, while Michael and Isabel occupied the opposite side. "I hope you like homemade food," Carlos commented, as a middle-aged woman served a steaming vegetable soup. "Ms. Zelia has been our cook for 30 years. "It's delicious," Michael commented sincerely after the first spoonful, surprising himself. When was the last time he had appreciated something as simple as homemade soup? "So, Mr. Dawson," Carlos started the conversation after a few minutes of awkward silence. "How did you meet our Julia?" Michael almost choked on his bread, while Isabel raised her eyebrows, clearly interested in the answer. "We met at an aerospace engineering event," Julia responded quickly. "Mr. Dawson was investing in a private airport project." "Ah, yes," Carlos smiled, not convinced by the half-truth. "And now you meet again years later. Destiny has curious ways." "Do you believe in destiny?" Isabel asked, trying to participate in the conversation. "I believe in consequences," the old man responded, his eyes fixed on Michael. "Every choice we make creates waves that eventually return to our shore, no matter how far we swim to avoid them." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the clinking of cutlery, and Leo's occasional voice, oblivious to the tension between the adults, animatedly recounting his day at school. After dessert, a pumpkin pudding with cinnamon, which Michael was surprised to enjoy, Carlos suggested they rest a little before dinner. "The sweets are ready. I imagine you are tired from the trip." "Actually," Isabel rose gracefully, "I'd love to see a bit of the city. Michael, would you mind accompanying me?" Before he could respond, Leo intervened enthusiastically. "Can I show you the city? I know all the cool places." The look of panic Michael shot at Julia was met with a slight, challenging smile. "It would be educational for Leo to serve as a guide," she commented casually. "If you don't mind, of course." Michael began, looking at Isabel, who was clearly not enthusiastic about the idea. I'll go with you, Julia decided. There are places Leo doesn't know well yet. We can show them the lookout and the historic church. The small excursion through the rural town became a strange emotional journey for Michael. Seeing Leo running ahead, enthusiastically pointing out details that only a child would notice, with Julia walking silently by his side, created a disturbing illusion of family life that never existed. Isabel, noticing the strange dynamic, subtly distanced herself, feigning interest in the windows of the small craft shops. He's extraordinary, Michael commented in a low voice, watching Leo explain to a visibly uncomfortable Isabel how the old clocks in the church tower worked. He is, Julia agreed. In spite of you, the harshness of the words contrasting with the softness of her voice. Julia, I didn't know. Would it have made a difference? She interrupted, finally looking at him directly. If you had known I was pregnant when you decided to leave only a note and disappear? The question hung between them, heavy as the humid air before a storm. Michael wanted to say yes, that he never would have left if he had known. But the truth was much more complex. Would the man he was 5 years ago have stayed? Or would he have just offered financial support, maintaining the emotional distance he had always cherished? I don't know, he answered honestly. I was a different person then. And who are you now, Michael? The question was almost a whisper. The man who is going to ask the model to marry him, or the man who just found out he has a son? Before he could answer, Leo returned running, holding something in his hands. Look what I found, Mommy. A wooden plane. The man at the store said it's handmade. It's beautiful, honey. Julia smiled, stroking her son's hair. Can I, Mommy? Please. The boy looked hopeful, having clearly discussed something with the craftsman at the store. All right, but only for a moment. Leo turned to Michael, holding out the small wooden plane. Do you want to hold it? The man said it brings good luck when we give it to someone special to touch first. The world seemed to stop as Michael received the gift from the small hands. Something so simple, a wooden toy, suddenly carried the weight of all the choices he had made and all the ones he still had to make. It's very special, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Leo. In the distance, Isabel watched the scene, a calculating expression gradually replacing her initial discomfort. Night fell over Casimiro de Abreu with a speed typical of small towns. Dinner at the guest house was served by candlelight in the garden, under a starry sky that Michael could barely remember when he had last appreciated. After dinner, while Leo was being put to bed, the adults gathered in the living room. Carlos served an amber drink in small crystal glasses. Homemade cachaça, he explained. Aged in oak barrels for 20 years, perfect for difficult conversations. Isabel looked at her watch, a discreet but visibly expensive model. I think I'll turn in, she announced, giving a meaningful look to Michael. It's been an unexpected day. When she left the room, Carlos also stood up. I believe you two have a lot to discuss, he said, his wise eyes moving between Michael and Julia. Just remember, some structures, once broken, can never be rebuilt exactly as they were. But sometimes, what is built in their place is stronger, more true. With these enigmatic words, the old man withdrew, leaving them alone with the heavy silence and the sweet aroma of the cachaça. Why now? Michael finally asked. After 5 years? Julia swirled the liquid in her glass, watching the candlelight reflect in the facets of the crystal. It wasn't my idea, she admitted. But when the opportunity arose, I couldn't refuse. What opportunity? Your mother. Julia met his eyes, the revelation hanging between them like smoke. She found me 6 months ago. Michael felt his blood run cold. My mother? How? Private investigators. Apparently, she always suspected that you might have a child somewhere. She said you followed a predictable pattern. Intense involvement followed by abrupt flight when things got emotionally deep. The description of his behavior was striking in its accuracy. It was exactly what he had done with Julia, and with others before her. And Isabel? Is she also part of this plan? Julia's smile was sad, almost compassionate. Your girlfriend is Amanda Vidal, a private investigator hired by your mother more than a year ago. She's not an international model, Michael. She has a law degree and specializes in locating people and building behavioral profiles. The shock of the revelation was like a physical blow. Michael stood up abruptly, his mind reeling with the implications. 2 years of a relationship, all the intimate moments, the confidences exchanged, all part of an elaborate trap? I don't believe it, he murmured, although deep down he knew it was true. It explained the mysterious message, the calculated serenity of Isabel, or rather, Amanda, in the face of the day's strange situations. Why would my mother do this? He asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. That, Julia responded softly, is something you will have to ask her. She'll be here tomorrow. The sunrise in Casimiro de Abreu brought a symphony of sounds Michael had forgotten existed. The chirping of birds, the soft rustle of the wind in the leaves, the distant lowing of cattle on neighboring farms. Sitting on the guest house porch, a cup of strong coffee between his hands, the businessman watched the first rays of sun paint the lake golden, while his mind processed the previous night's revelations. Isabel, or rather, Amanda, was not in her room when he returned. His first impulse was to call his lawyer, initiate some kind of legal process against this invasion of privacy, this elaborate manipulation. But something stopped him. Perhaps the aged cachaça, perhaps Julia's sincere gaze, or perhaps, just perhaps, the weight of a responsibility that was beginning to take concrete form in his consciousness. You were always an early riser. His mother's voice startled him, making him almost spill his coffee. Catherine Dawson, at 6, maintained the discreet elegance and impeccable posture that had always characterized her. Dressed with a simplicity that still screamed sophistication, she sat in the chair next to her son, her eyes, the same brown eyes he'd inherited, studying him with that familiar intensity. "Mother," Michael managed to say, surprise giving way to confusion, and then to irritation. "You have a lot to explain." "I do," she agreed calmly, pouring herself coffee from the thermos on the rustic table. "Just as you do." And the silence between them stretched for a few moments, filled only by the sounds of awakening nature. Michael struggled to organize his thoughts, to formulate the right questions, to understand how his own mother, the woman who had always respected his space, his decisions, his independence, had orchestrated such an elaborate intervention in his life. Why? Was all he could finally ask. Catherine took a deep breath, her eyes lost in the landscape for a moment before returning to her son. "Because you are becoming your father," she responded with a softness that did not diminish the force of the words. "And I promised myself, when I first held you, that I would do everything in my power to prevent that from happening." The mention of his father made Michael stiffen. Arthur Dawson had been a ruthless businessman, building an empire at the cost of destroyed relationships, including his marriage and his relationship with his son. He had died alone in his luxury penthouse, surrounded by wealth and empty of genuine connections. "I'm not like him," Michael protested, his voice low but firm. "No?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "How many relationships have you ended at the first sign of emotional depth? How many times have you abandoned people who cared about you because it was easier than facing your own vulnerability? Your father did the exact same thing, Michael. The difference is he had me to clean up the mess." The words hit Michael like precisely thrown stones, each one finding a truth he had spent years denying. "And who cleaned up my mess?" he asked, fearing the answer. "No one," Catherine responded simply. "Julia refused any contact, any help. When I finally found out about Leo, through investigators I hired out of a purely maternal intuition, she had already rebuilt her life here." How is she now?" The question escaped before Michael could contain it. A small smile curved Catherine's lips. "Extraordinary. She used her engineering background to specialize in aviation. She works for 3 different companies. She flies to international destinations. She raised a son alone. She built an impeccable reputation, and yet made time to be an active part of this community." The pride in his mother's voice when she spoke of Julia was undisguisable, and Michael felt a pang of jealousy, not of the admiration for Julia, but of the strength of character that he himself had never been able to demonstrate. "And now?" he asked, placing the empty cup on the table. "What do you expect to happen? That I abandon my life, my businesses, and move to this small town to play happy family?" The look Catherine gave her son was a mixture of disappointment and stubborn hope. "I expect that you, for the first time in your life, face the consequences of your choices instead of running from them. That you get to know your son, not because you have to, but because he deserves to be known. And maybe, just maybe, that you learn there are things more valuable in this life than corporate mergers and quarterly profits." Before Michael could respond, the sound of children's footsteps interrupted the conversation. Leo appeared on the porch, still in his pajamas, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Good morning," he murmured, then froze when he saw Catherine. His eyes went wide, the sleepiness instantly replaced by a vibrant curiosity. "You're the lady from the portrait," Catherine smiled, genuinely surprised. "Portrait?" "In Grandpa Carlos's office," Leo explained, approaching cautiously. "There's a picture of you with him from a long time ago. Grandpa said you were a great friend of the family." Michael looked at his mother, confused. Catherine seemed equally surprised by the mention of the portrait, but quickly regained her composure. "Yes, I met your grandfather many years ago," she confirmed, "even before you were born." Leo studied Catherine with an almost comical intensity, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "You look like him," he declared finally, pointing to Michael. "That's my mother," Michael explained. The word sounded strange in his own ears. "So that makes her your grandmother?" Leo's eyes lit up with the realization. "You're my grandma?" Catherine shot a quick look at Michael before nodding. "Yes, honey, I am your grandma." What happened next took Michael completely by surprise. Leo threw himself into Catherine's arms with total abandon, hugging her as if he had found a lost treasure. "I have a grandma," he exclaimed, the pure joy in his voice making something break inside Michael's chest. "Wait until I tell Peter at school. He has 3 grandmas, but his grandma isn't as pretty as you." Catherine laughed, hugging her grandson with a naturalness that made Michael realize this was not their first meeting. The thought should have angered him. Another manipulation, another secret. But instead, he felt only a deep sadness for the moments he had missed, the first words, first steps, first smiles he had never witnessed. "Have you had breakfast yet, champ?" Catherine asked, pulling back enough to look at her grandson's animated face. "Not yet. Mommy said I can have hot chocolate today because it's a special day." "And what special day is this?" Michael couldn't help but ask. Leo looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "Important visitor day. Grandpa Carlos said people who come from far away deserve hot chocolate." The simplicity of the child's logic made Michael smile involuntarily. There was something refreshing about the way children saw the world, without the layers of complication that adults added to everything. "Leo, honey," Julia's voice sounded from the porch door. "Don't bother the guests so early." "I'm not bothering them," the boy protested. "I'm meeting my grandma." Julia froze, her eyes meeting Catherine's in a silent dialogue that Michael couldn't decipher. There was history there, deeper than he had initially imagined. "Good morning, Catherine," Julia finally said, approaching. "I didn't know you would arrive so early." "The first flight," Catherine responded simply. "Carlos picked me up at the airport." Another piece of the puzzle. Carlos, Julia's grandfather, was clearly involved in this family conspiracy. The more Michael discovered, the more he realized how elaborate the web woven around him had been. "Leo, go get dressed for breakfast," Julia instructed gently. "Then you can show Catherine your new airport model." The boy nodded enthusiastically before running inside, leaving the three adults in a silence heavy with unresolved tension. "How long have you known my mother, exactly?" Michael finally asked Julia. "Personally for 6 months," she responded, sitting at the table. "But through letters, almost 3 years." "Letters?" Michael looked at Catherine, incredulous. "In the digital age," his mother shrugged elegantly. "Some conversations are too sacred for emails that can be hacked, or messages that can be spied on. And there's something about handwriting that forces sincerity, don't you think?" Before Michael could fully process this new information, Amanda, the fake Isabel, appeared on the porch, dressed in practical clothes that contrasted dramatically with the elaborate style she had maintained during the 2 years of her relationship with Michael. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted, her accent subtly different from what Michael was used to. "I imagine it's time for us to drop the pretenses." Michael stood up abruptly. 2 years, Amanda. 2 years of lies. "I prefer to think of it as 2 years of in-depth research," she responded calmly. "And believe me, Michael, I learned much more about you than I ever needed to reveal to your mother." "Why?" The question was addressed to everyone and no one in particular. "Why this elaborate theater? Why not just tell me about Leo?" "We tried," Julia responded softly. "In the first few months after I found out I was pregnant, I sent dozens of emails, left countless messages, all blocked, all ignored. And when I finally found you," Catherine continued, "you were so immersed in your world of business, so convinced of your own narrative, that any mention of past responsibilities was immediately rejected. We needed you to see," Amanda added, "not just hear about it, not just know about it intellectually, but see your son, feel his reality, understand what you were missing before it was too late." Michael sat down again, stunned by the brutal sincerity of these 3 women, who each in their own way had conspired to confront him with the truth he had spent years avoiding. "And what happens now?" he asked, his voice more vulnerable than he had ever allowed in public. "That," Julia responded, "depends entirely on you. Not on the Dawson Empire, not on the impeccable CEO, not on the man who built skyscrapers and exclusive resorts. It depends on Michael, the man, the father, the person you choose to be from today onwards." The silence that followed was interrupted by the arrival of Carlos, carrying a tray with homemade cakes and more fresh coffee. The old man assessed the scene with shrewd eyes before smiling. "I see that the formal introductions have been made," he commented casually. "Excellent. I hate secrets at breakfast. They hinder digestion." The comment, so mundane amidst the emotional intensity of the moment, provoked reluctant laughter around the table, momentarily easing the tension. "Catherine," Carlos continued, sitting at the head of the table, "Leo is anxious to show you his collection. I believe he inherited his grandfather's technical eye." The casual mention of the relationship made Michael look up. You were a pilot, he remembered, connecting the dots. In the photos in the hallway. Carlos nodded. 42-year career. I started in small cargo planes and ended up commanding Boeing 747-47s for Varig. The passion for flying has been in the family for 3 generations now. 4, Catherine corrected softly. Michael's father was also fascinated by aviation, although he never pursued a career. Another unexpected revelation. Michael looked at his mother, confused. Dad rarely talked about anything he couldn't completely control, Catherine responded. And the sky, Michael? The sky can never be truly controlled. It can only be respected, understood, navigated with humility. The analogy did not go unnoticed. Michael glimpsed for the first time the possibility that his life, so carefully planned, so rigidly controlled, might be missing exactly what would make it meaningful. The ability to adapt to the unexpected, to navigate the uncontrollable, to find beauty in unpredictability. Leo returned at that moment, now fully dressed and brimming with energy. Grandma, are you coming to see my collection now? It has a plane just like the one Mr. Michael came in. It's a Gulfstream G150. Michael looked at his son, with a new perspective. This small being, whom he had not helped raise, whom he had not known until yesterday, had already absorbed knowledge about aviation that many adults did not possess. The technical precision, the attention to detail, the passion for knowledge were traits he recognized in himself, although directed at different fields. Why don't we all go? He suggested, surprising himself. I'd like to see your collection too, Leo. When the smile that lit up the boy's face was like a ray of sunshine, piercing heavy clouds. Bright, unexpected, transformative. For a brief moment, Michael glimpsed what could have been, and perhaps what could still be. As they followed Leo down the guest house hallway, Julia approached Michael, her voice low enough for only him to hear. He has your smile, she commented, and your stubbornness. There was no bitterness in her words, just a simple statement of undeniable biological facts. Michael nodded, unable to find words adequate for the moment. The visit to Leo's room turned into an impromptu lesson on aviation, with the boy displaying surprising knowledge for his age. With each enthusiastic explanation, each meticulous demonstration, Michael felt something unknown growing in his chest, a mixture of pride, admiration, and sadness for the lost years. The hours turned into days, as the supposed technical failure of the jet conveniently extended. Michael discovered that his phone mysteriously didn't get an adequate signal for video conferences, limiting him to brief emails and text messages to his team. The Dawson Empire would continue to function without his constant presence, a realization both liberating and disturbing for a man who had always believed himself to be indispensable. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Michael found himself sitting by the lake, watching Leo feed the ducks with pieces of old bread. Next to the boy, Catherine was laughing at something he had said, her eyes shining with a joy that Michael had rarely witnessed. He's completely won over my mother, he commented, when Julia approached, bringing a tray with fresh lemonade. Leo has that effect on people, she responded, sitting on the rustic bench next to him. It's as if he can see directly through the layers we've built over the years. But Michael nodded, watching his son. It was still strange to think of him that way, running after a particularly bold duck that was trying to steal the bread directly from his hands. Does he know? He finally asked the question that had been consuming him for days. About me, I mean. Julia took a sip of lemonade, her eyes fixed on the scene in front of her. He knows that his dad is someone who couldn't be present, who works far away, who one day might be able to be a part of his life. Gentle lies, Michael murmured. Adapted truths, Julia corrected. Leo is still too young to understand abandonment or rejection. When he's older, if you decide to be a part of his life, he'll understand that people make mistakes, learn, and grow. And what if I don't make that choice? The question escaped before he could contain it. Julia turned to face him, her green eyes studying him intensely. Then I will continue to raise our son to be a better man than his father, a man who faces his responsibilities instead of running from them. The harshness of the words contrasted with the softness of her voice, making them even more impactful. Michael realized that despite everything, Julia didn't hate him. She just saw him with absolute clarity, without the illusions he had cultivated about himself for so long. Why aviation? He asked, changing the subject. Of all the careers you could have pursued, with your brilliance, why did you choose one that keeps you constantly on the move? A slight smile curved her lips. Perhaps because in the sky, Michael, there's no way to feign absolute control. You can have the best training, the most advanced aircraft, the most meticulous planning, but you will still be at the mercy of elements you cannot master. The wind, the air currents, sudden weather changes. And that's liberating for you. It's honest, she responded simply. And after years of living an illusion of security by your side, I've discovered that I prefer the honesty of uncertainty 1,000 times over the false security of empty promises. Michael felt the impact of the words like a physical blow. It was true. He had built relationships based on implicit promises he never intended to keep, on expectations he had fueled without ever considering their emotional cost to others. Before he could respond, Leo came running toward them, his face illuminated by a radiant smile. "Look what I found!" he exclaimed, opening his small hands to reveal a small turtle. "Grandpa Carlos said it's a baby tiger turtle. Can we build a little house for it in the lake?" Michael looked at Julia, unsure of how to respond. She nodded slightly, giving him silent permission to participate in this moment. "I think the little turtle already has a house," he replied, surprising himself with the naturalness in his voice. "The whole lake is its home. If we take it somewhere else, it might miss its family." Leo's face grew serious as he considered the words. "Just like you missed your family when you went to work far away?" The innocent question hit Michael with unexpected force. How to explain to a child that he had deliberately chosen distance instead of connection, that working far away was a fabricated story to soften a much more painful truth? "Sometimes," he responded carefully, "adults make mistakes. They think they're doing the right thing, but then they realize they've lost important things along the way." Leo studied his face with surprising intensity for such a small child. "Like what?" "Like meeting wonderful people," Michael responded honestly. "Like you?" The smile returned to the boy's face. "You can visit whenever you want. We have a guest room, and Grandpa Carlos makes pancakes on Sundays." The simplicity of the offer, the uncomplicated generosity, made something break inside Michael's chest. How could this small being, who had never received anything from him, so freely offer what he had? "Thank you, Leo," he managed to say, stroking the boy's hair. "That's very kind." After carefully releasing the turtle into the water, Leo ran back to Catherine, who was waiting for him, with a mysterious package that looked suspiciously like an airplane model kit. "He's extraordinary," Michael commented, watching his son walk away. "He is," Julia agreed. In spite of everything, the silence that followed was interrupted by the arrival of Amanda, now dressed in practical clothes that contrasted dramatically with the elaborate wardrobe she had maintained as Isabel. "News arrived from Rio," she announced, sitting down with them. "The parts for the plane have finally been located. They'll be here tomorrow afternoon." Michael raised an eyebrow. Have you finally decided to end our little family intervention? Amanda smiled humorlessly. My job is done, Michael. What you do with the information you've obtained is entirely your choice. And what choice is that, exactly? He asked, irritation growing in his voice. Abandon the life I built to become a weekend dad? Or simply sign generous child support checks and go on as if nothing happened? Julia stood up abruptly. This is a conversation I'd rather not witness. Please excuse me. As she walked away, Amanda watched her with a thoughtful expression before turning to Michael. Do you know what the most difficult part of my job was for the past 2 years? She asked rhetorically. It wasn't pretending to be interested in your endless business stories or participating in tedious corporate events. It was witnessing an intelligent and capable man live a completely empty life without even realizing it. Empty, Michael repeated, indignant. I built an empire that employs thousands of people. I transformed entire neighborhoods. I revolutionized the country's luxury real estate market. And when you go back to your 50 million penthouse at night, who is there to hear about your day? Amanda asked softly. When you receive an award, who genuinely celebrates your success? When you get sick, who holds your hand? The questions hung between them, uncomfortably precise. Michael looked away, unable to sustain the intensity in Amanda's eyes. Your mother didn't do this out of cruelty, Michael. She continued. She did it out of love, because she saw her own husband walk the same path and end up alone, despite all his wealth and power. What do you know about my father? Michael asked defensively. I know he also had a son he didn't acknowledge, Amanda replied calmly. A son who grew up without knowing his true origins until a rare genetic disease revealed the truth. Michael felt his blood run cold in his veins. What are you talking about? Ask your mother. Amanda stood up. Some stories are not mine to tell. She walked away, leaving Michael with more questions than answers, a pattern that seemed to define his days in that small town. That night, the guest house hosted a special dinner in the garden, illuminated by colorful lanterns hung from the trees. A long table had been set, covered with a white linen tablecloth and decorated with wildflowers in rustic vases. The food, simple but delicious, was served on artisanal ceramic platters, accompanied by red wine, produced at a nearby winery. Leo was allowed to stay up past his usual bedtime, participating in the meal with the adults, although his energy clearly began to wane as the night wore on. Eventually, he fell asleep on Julia's lap, who continued to participate in the conversation while gently stroking her son's hair. It's time to put him to bed, she murmured, trying to stand up without waking the boy. Can I help? Michael offered impulsively. Julia hesitated for a moment before nodding. With care, Michael took Leo into his arms, surprising himself with how much the small body weighed. A comforting weight that seemed to fill a void in his chest he didn't even know existed. Following Julia down the hallway, he entered the boy's room, now familiar after days of visits to see his plane collection and hear endless stories about famous pilots and extraordinary aircraft. With a tenderness he didn't know he possessed, Michael laid Leo on the cockpit-shaped bed. The boy stirred slightly, but didn't wake up when Julia carefully removed his shoes and covered him with a comforter decorated with clouds and planes. Does he always sleep like this? Michael asked in a low voice. So peacefully. Most nights, Julia responded, adjusting the position of the pillow. Except when there are thunderstorms. He's afraid of thunder. Another detail about his son that Michael never would have known if it weren't for this elaborate intervention. How many others were there? First tooth, first word, first step. Milestones he had irrecoverably lost. Why are you letting me into his life now? He asked when they left the room, leaving the door ajar as per Julia's instructions. After 5 years of keeping him away from me, Julia leaned against the hallway wall, her eyes studying him with that familiar intensity that always left him uncomfortably exposed. Because Leo is starting to ask questions I can no longer answer with stories about pilots on international routes, she responded honestly. Because he deserves the chance to know his complete story, even if that includes a father who chose not to be a part of his life. And what if I want to be a part of it now? The words escaped before Michael could fully consider them. That would depend entirely on your terms, Michael, Julia responded, crossing her arms defensively. Leo is not a weekend project or a social obligation to impress investors. He is a complete person, with emotional needs, with expectations, with a heart that can be easily broken. I wouldn't do that, Michael protested. You already did, Julia responded simply. With me, with others before me, I imagine. It's a pattern, Michael, one that your mother recognized because she lived with your father. The question is, are you willing to break this cycle, truly, or just reacting emotionally to a situation that will soon seem less urgent when you're back in your world of skyscrapers and offshore bank accounts? The brutal frankness of her words hit Michael like cold water, waking him up to truths he had avoided confronting his entire adult life. I don't know, he admitted finally, the honesty painful but necessary. I want to believe I am. I want to be better than my father was, but I don't know if I know how. Julia's face softened slightly at this unexpected vulnerability. No one is born knowing how to be a father, Michael. It's a skill you learn daily, through trial and error. The difference is that some choose to learn, while others run away at the first sign of difficulty. Michael nodded, finally understanding the magnitude of the choice before him. It wasn't just about legally acknowledging Leo or providing financial support. It was about committing to a journey of personal growth that would require more courage from him than any business negotiation had ever demanded. The first rays of sun filtered through the guest room window, waking Michael from a surprisingly deep sleep. For a moment, he was disoriented, accustomed to the panorama of skyscrapers that his penthouse in Sao Paulo offered. Instead, he saw only blue sky, distant mountains, and the golden shimmer of the lake through the window. A week had passed since his unplanned arrival in Casimiro de Abreu, a week that felt simultaneously like an instant and an eternity. The jet's technical failure had finally been resolved, and today was the day to leave or to choose to stay in some way. He got up and walked to the window. In the garden below, Leo was playing with a small glider plane, running and throwing it into the air repeatedly, adjusting the angle with each attempt, intuitively learning about aerodynamics through play. Julia was watching him closely, smiling as she drank her morning cup of coffee. Michael felt a sharp pang in his chest, not of pain, but of recognition. The scene below was a glimpse of a life he had never lived, of a possibility he had thrown away, without ever understanding its value. His phone vibrated on the bedside table. The signal, miraculously restored the night before, brought dozens of emails, messages, and notifications, his empire calling him back. One notification in particular caught his attention. Dawson Incorporações shares had fallen 3%, after rumors about an unacknowledged heir of the CEO. The news had already leaked then. Probably the work of some employee at the airport, who recognized the famous businessman boarding with the international model and disembarking in a small town with a pilot and a child who was his mirror image. Another email, this one from his financial director, warned of an urgent board meeting needed to control damage to the company's image. Michael almost laughed at the irony. his entire adult life dedicated to building an impeccable reputation, and now the existence of his own son was considered damage to be controlled. He dressed slowly, every movement deliberate, as if he were making a decision with each button he buttoned, each clothing choice. When he finally went down for breakfast, he found the family gathered in the garden. Not just Julia and Leo, but also Carlos, Catherine, and surprisingly Amanda, still present despite her mission being technically complete. "Good morning," he greeted, feeling strangely nervous, as if he were about to give a crucial presentation to investors, instead of having coffee with people who, in different ways, were his family. "Michael!" Leo waved animatedly. "Look how far my plane can fly now." The boy threw the small glider, which this time traced a graceful arc through the air before landing gently on the grass several feet away. "Impressive," Michael commented genuinely, sitting at the table. "Did you adjust the angle of the wings?" Leo nodded enthusiastically. "Grandpa Carlos showed me how. It's all about aerodynamics." Leo has an intuitive understanding of physics that is truly remarkable for his age, Julia commented, passing Michael a cup of coffee. His science teacher says he asks questions that many adults wouldn't think to ask. The pride in her voice was evident, as was the silent implication. "You missed all of this. 5 years of achievements, discoveries, firsts. I imagine you're anxious to return to civilization," Carlos commented, watching him over his reading glasses, the local newspaper open in front of him. "The jet has been ready since last night." "Actually," Michael began, surprising himself with the words that followed. "I was thinking of staying a few more days if it's not inconvenient." The silence that followed was eloquent. Julia looked up from her cup, visibly surprised. Catherine smiled softly, as if she had foreseen this moment. Leo, oblivious to the adult complexities, simply celebrated. "Yes, we can go to the Aviation Museum in Mackay. There's a real Spitfire there." "That would be acceptable," Julia responded carefully, her eyes studying Michael with newly awakened caution. "I have some virtual meetings that I can't postpone," Michael explained. "But they can be done from here, and I'd like to get to know Leo's routine better." That afternoon, while Leo was at school, Michael finally had the conversation he had been avoiding with his mother. Sitting by the lake, away from the others' ears, Catherine confirmed what Amanda had hinted at. "Your father had another son, 3 years older than you," she revealed calmly, "with a company secretary, before we met. When she got pregnant, he fired her and denied any responsibility." "And how did you find out?" Michael asked, feeling a strange mixture of shock and inexplicable relief, as if a mystery he hadn't even known existed finally made sense. "When you were 12, we got a call from the hospital. A 15-year-old boy urgently needed a bone marrow transplant. He had a rare genetic condition that also appears in your father's family. The doctors had traced possible compatible donors. And he was my brother?" "Rodrigo." Catherine supplied the name softly. "He was my half-brother. Yes," she confirmed. "Your father denied it to the end, even when the tests confirmed it. He refused to help. He forbade you from being tested as a potential donor." Michael closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of this revelation. "And what happened to him?" "He found another, less compatible donor. He survived, but with complications. He lives in Canada now. He's a university professor of engineering." "Did you keep in touch?" "Discreetly. Your father never knew. Rodrigo contacted me when he was 20, wanting to know his story. He wasn't angry, just curious. He's an extraordinary man, Michael. You would like him." Michael felt as if the ground were opening up beneath his feet. His entire life he believed he was an only child, raised by an emotionally distant but at least physically present father. Now he discovered that he was part of a pattern, a cycle of abandonment he was perilously close to repeating. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, though he already intuited the answer. "Because you are at the same crossroads your father was." Twice he chose the path of least emotional involvement, with Rodrigo and then with you, in his own way. The question is, which choice will you make, Michael? You. That night, after helping Leo with his homework, a surprisingly rewarding experience, Michael found Julia alone on the porch, watching the stars. Without preamble, he said, "I want to be a part of his life. I don't know how. I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I want to try." Julia continued looking at the sky for a long moment before responding. "It's not a simple decision, Michael. It's not just about occasional visits or expensive birthday presents. It's about consistency, commitment, being present, even when it's inconvenient." "I know," he responded, approaching to look at the same sky she was contemplating. "I'm willing to learn, to change what's necessary." "Why?" The question was simple, but loaded with meaning. "Why now? After 5 years?" Michael considered several answers, some calculated to impress her, others to arouse sympathy. But in the end, he chose the simple, raw truth. "Because when I look at Leo, I see the person I could have been. If I had learned early that connection is more important than control. And because I don't want him to grow up thinking he wasn't important enough for me to change." Something on Julia's face softened almost imperceptibly. "It won't be easy for any of us. The things that truly matter rarely are," she responded, surprising herself with a wisdom she never knew she possessed. In the days that followed, Michael began the delicate process of integrating himself into Leo's life without disrupting the stability Julia had so carefully built. He participated in an open house at school, where Leo proudly introduced him as a family friend who builds huge buildings. He accompanied him to swimming practice, discovering that the boy had inherited not only his aptitude for numbers, but also his competitive spirit. Every new detail about his son was a treasure, from the way he wrinkled his nose when he was concentrating, to his inexplicable aversion to peas, or how he would hum softly while he drew. In video conferences with his executive team, Michael surprised everyone by announcing a 3-month partial leave of absence. He delegated responsibilities, reorganized projects, and, for the first time in his career, prioritized something above business. "The board is not happy," he commented to Amanda during one of the rare moments they spoke alone. "They think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis." "And are you?" she asked, her role as an investigator apparently never completely abandoned. "I'm having an identity crisis," he corrected with an ironic smile. "I'm discovering that the man I thought I was my entire adult life is only a fraction of the man I can be." On the morning of the 15th day, in Casimiro de Abreu, while having coffee on the now familiar porch, Leo asked the question everyone knew would eventually come. "You're my dad, aren't you?" The silence that followed was absolute. Julia froze, her cup halfway to her lips. Catherine and Carlos exchanged worried looks. Amanda discreetly got up and walked away, giving them privacy. Michael felt his heart race, but he kept his eyes fixed on the boys, eyes so similar to his own, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and wisdom beyond his years. "Yes," he responded simply. "I am your dad." Leo nodded, as if confirming something he had already suspected. "Why didn't you live with us?" The question, so direct and impossible to evade, demanded equal honesty. Michael looked briefly at Julia, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to navigate these delicate waters. "Because I made a mistake," he responded, carefully choosing his words. A big mistake. When your mother and I met, I didn't know how to be the person she and you deserved. So, instead of learning, I ran away. Like a coward? Leo asked, the innocence of childhood allowing him a frankness no adult would dare. Michael felt the impact of the word, but he didn't look away. Yes, like a coward, but I'm trying to be braver now. Leo considered this for a moment, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Grandpa Carlos says that being brave isn't not being afraid. It's doing the right thing, even when you're afraid. Your grandpa is a wise man, Michael responded, feeling an unexpected gratitude for the old man who had helped raise his son in his absence. Are you going to live with us now? The next question made all the adults hold their breath. No, honey, Julia intervened gently, but your dad wants to be a part of your life, in a different way. How? Leo insisted, looking between the two of them. Michael took a deep breath before responding. I want to get to know you, Leo. Learn about your planes, your friends, your favorite stories. I want to be there for your games and school presentations. I can't change the past, but we can build a future together if you want. Leo considered the proposal with a seriousness surprising for someone so young. Finally, he extended his small hand toward Michael. We have a deal then, but you have to promise never to be a coward again. Michael took the little hand offered, feeling the enormous weight of the promise he was about to make. I promise to try every day, he responded, knowing it was the only honest promise he could offer. 3 months later, Michael watched from the co-pilot seat as Julia piloted the small Cessna over the Green Mountains. In the back seat, Leo pointed enthusiastically at cloud formations and details of the landscape below, his animated voice amplified by the headset. Much had changed since that first interrupted flight. Michael had kept his word, reorganizing his life to include regular visits to Casimiro de Abreu. He rented a house in the city for the weekends, learned to cook Leo's favorite dishes poorly, and even started taking flying lessons. Not to compete with Julia, but to better understand the world that so fascinated his son. The Dawson corporations had survived the initial scandal, and after a press conference where Michael publicly acknowledged Leo's paternity, the shares had stabilized. Some conservative investors left. Others, surprisingly, saw the transparency as a positive sign of corporate maturity. Look, Dad! Leo's voice in the headset still caused a wave of emotion in Michael every time he called him that, a title he was slowly learning to earn. That's our lake down there. I see, he responded, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. It looks even more beautiful from above. Everything looks different when you change your perspective, Julia commented, gently adjusting the controls. Ready to take over for a minute? The offer surprised Michael. Are you sure? We're at cruising altitude, clear sky, perfect conditions, she responded, that slight smile he was beginning to recognize again curving her lips. Besides, I have good reflexes if you start taking us toward a mountain. With care, Michael placed his hands on the controls, feeling the subtle vibration of the aircraft, the literal responsibility for 3 lives in his hands. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Are you flying, Dad? Leo exclaimed, pride evident in his voice. I am, Michael confirmed, concentrating intensely on keeping the plane level. I am flying. But somehow, those simple words carried a much deeper meaning, not just about controlling an aircraft, but about finally taking control of his own life, his choices, his responsibilities. The open sky in front of him, infinite in its possibilities, seemed the perfect setting for this moment of clarity. Michael Dawson, who had spent his life building structures that touched the sky, was finally learning to fly. Not alone, as he had always believed was more efficient, but accompanied, guided, supported by people who, in different ways, formed the family he never knew he needed. "Where are we going now?" Leo asked, his voice full of expectation. Michael exchanged a look with Julia before responding, finding in her eyes not the love they had once shared, but something equally valuable: respect, mutual understanding, and the silent promise of a future where they would both put their son's needs above all else. "Wherever you want," Michael responded, meaning so much more than just the flight's destination. "The sky is the limit."